Welcome to the PinLeader Podast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The PinLeader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome back to the PinLeader Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the art of procurement, and I have with me Kelly Barner, who is the co-founder and the head of content and operations at Art of Procurement and the host of the Art of Supply podcast. She has an MBA from Babson College as well as an MS in Library and Information Science from Simmons College. She has co-authored 3 books: Supply Market Intelligence for Procurement Professionals, Procurement at a Crossroads, and Finance Unleashed. In 2022, Kelly was one of the first 100 members of the LinkedIn Creators Accelerator Program, and she was selected as one of the 19 podcast hosts to participate in the first LinkedIn Podcast Academy. So if you want to talk about who has experience in podcasting in the beginning, especially with working with LinkedIn, it's got to be Kelly. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Shanda. And hello, listeners. It's nice to meet you all.
Yes, so many listeners in so many different countries. So we appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
So I'm going to get right to the first question because some of our listeners may be familiar with procurement and others may not. So can you share what procurement is in your own words?
I absolutely can. And I'll speak in sort of either a corporate, or you could also think public sector, like state level, city level kind of perspective. Procurement is all of the effort that goes into buying the products and services that make a business run. So if you're in a grocery store, it's the plastic bags your apples go in. It's also the supplier that comes in and washes the floors. If you're in a financial services business, it might be access to facilities maintenance or people that come in and do consulting work. Sometimes the things we buy are being resold to generate revenue. Other times, they just simply make a location run. But I think it's safe to say that no company, state, city, or even country would function if they didn't have a procurement team.
And I think that gets to the role of procurement and thinking about that, because some businesses that might be listening, they are just a one-person shop, and others are,
Right.
But they still have procurement going on, even if they're a one-person business.
They absolutely do. And in fact, in some cases, that's when procurement is done most effectively because it's practically personal at that point. And you truly understand what you're trying to achieve, all of the different goals, not just cost control, but all of the different things you're trying to achieve with those resources you're investing.
Mm-hmm. And those books too, I know, again, great guidance on if you're trying to figure out on how to go about just the process of purchasing and what that looks like, especially from if you're having a supply and demand where you're making a product and you need the different parts. And this leads me into my next question about how it has evolved in the last 5 to 10 years, because so many changes. And I know right now a lot of discussion about tariffs and discussions about that, but how has it evolved in your world?
So it's really interesting. The last 5 to 10 years, for everyone, but very much for procurement, contain 2 major things that are changing. One certainly was COVID. No, we're not over talking about COVID yet. Our objectives changed so much during that time because as opposed to thinking about keeping costs down, driving value up, maybe thinking about different kinds of business objectives we could satisfy through the supply base, it became, can we get the stuff we need? And for a long time, we had been so spoiled because there was no question. Well, of course you can get the things that you need. What are you talking about? Maybe every once in a while, you'd have to innovate something with a supplier to say, we need a custom spec or something adjusted. But even then, there was never a question about whether or not you could get your hands on it. So supply surety is something that kind of rose back to the forefront and that procurement has not totally let go of. It's become a key element in terms of risk assessment and mitigation. So that's one huge thing that's changed. The other huge thing that has changed is the rapid advance of technology in the last 5 years. I'm sure I'm not the only person to bring up AI in response to this question,
No.
but the way it has impacted procurement has been truly transformational because a lot of teams over the same time frame have gotten a little bit hollowed out. It used to be back in the day, especially if you worked for a very large enterprise, you could have a procurement team with hundreds of people on it, and they would have very dedicated specialties. Somewhere along the way, it became, well, if you can source oven mitts, you can also probably source some service, which is debatable, but that was the philosophy when it came to headcount. Whereas now we have the opportunity to say, okay, for some of these things where specific industry or category expertise doesn't matter as much, like office supplies, maybe you don't necessarily need to be an expert. We can bring in AI, intelligence, automation to streamline those more transactional things, which allows us to reallocate headcount and, frankly, salary resources to something very specific where you want someone with background like packaging or purchasing fuel. So it has really changed the operating model that's in play in most procurement teams, truthfully, big, medium, or small.
Well, that's part of a strategy too. I would think that anyone who's, again, looking at these different departments and making choices, I know that the thought of like, well, can I replace these team members with AI?
Right.
A lot of discussion going around, what can you do with and without team members? There's the strategy part. So the strategic function rather than the back office, I think that's kind of where you're leading. Can you talk a little bit more about, again, especially for those building strategic plans, how
Yes.
does procurement fit into that?
So it's really interesting because, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You started today by asking me, what's procurement? One thing I did not say in that answer is that procurement is buying. Because truthfully, in most organizations, regardless of the type, procurement is truly not buying. We're putting contracts in place, we're finding suppliers, we're managing their performance, we're ensuring that they get paid. But someone else, either through a system or some type of workflow, is actually responsible for making those purchases. Now, because we're no longer responsible for that, it allows us to sit back and think, okay, let's be a little bit more, I don't know, can we say philosophical about corporate spend and think, okay, we're dedicating all of these resources. What's the total picture imaginable in terms of the value that we could create or the risk we could head off or the competitive advantage we could even start to build if we thought differently about who we work with and where the money goes and how we measure the business impact from those activities? And so as procurement has made that transition from truthfully tactical buying to more of an oversight kind of role, it has given us more opportunities to have conversations with C-level executives where we're no longer just talking about, okay, we need to put in place a contract that allows us to buy fasteners or any other form of widget. Instead, we're thinking, what does this widget, bought well, placed well, used right, truly mean to this company? And you're going to get a different answer from marketing, from operations, from finance, from the CEO, but understanding all of those perspectives and being a part of those conversations so that as new products are developed or new services are defined, or you're simply understanding how to protect the net margin of the business, we can start to anticipate how overall business initiatives connect down through the supply chain that, frankly, we're dependent on in most cases for success.
I think that right there, that influence starts with understanding what that net can really do for a company. What you just explained there, the difference between buying, which again, like you said, systems, or could be the accounting department could be making
Absolutely.
the actual buy, but the strategy that you just said, how many to even buy in quantity of what that, do you need 250? Do you need it at the breaking point? Should you be negotiating smaller amounts? Right now, budgets are getting tighter for companies, for those that may be going through a strain, the economy, other factors might be impacting them. And the demand of whatever, especially if they're turning out a product that needs different pieces to actually go in and then they resell it, or they themselves create something with it. What would you tell C-suite executives on what to do when they're faced with looking at cuts and how to go about this in a most efficient way?
I mean, I think a lot of that is understanding the relative value created for your end customer through every dollar spent. And there's a couple of different ways to look at that. So a little divide in terms of terminology that we commonly talk about in procurement is the difference between direct and indirect. So to go back to my supermarket example, if you're the person in produce buying and you're buying apples or oranges or bananas, and those are going into supermarket locations for people to buy, that is direct spend because those products are directly connected with a straight line to the company's revenue. If you work for that same company, but you're buying the millwork or the display case that those apples are made to look so nice and healthy sitting on, or the little roll of plastic bags, understanding everything, whether it's the apple or the bag that the apple goes into, affects the customer experience is critical to be successful at the executive level. And so you could say, well, we're going to buy the very best apples at this spec, right? And we're going to get them at the best price point possible because people want nice, shiny, healthy produce when they come into our store. And in order to do that, you downgrade a little bit on the thickness or the blend of the plastic that's in that produce bag. And I come into your store and I take this beautiful, gorgeous apple that I've handpicked and put it in the plastic bag, and it goes right through the plastic bag.
Wait a minute. Were you with me last week? Because this happened to me.
And there you have a situation where the executive team needs to think more about procurement. But that's exactly it. Understanding how all of these things come together. I will add, and maybe this happened last week too, if you can't get the plastic bag sections apart to put the apple in it,
Yes.
Similar problem. All the world's ills can be illustrated in the produce department of a supermarket from my point of view. But that's a case where it's all of these little balancing levers. And you're thinking, yes, we want the best apples sold at a reasonable price, gotten into our stores quickly. But our customers are going to be really mad if they pick up that bag of apples to take it and put it on their kitchen counter or put it on the grocery belt and all the apples fall out. It's that overall experience that you're trying to create that must come together through certainly staffing, product for sale, packaging, the whole experience and all the services that go into making those facilities run.
Well, I just want to do another confession. I'm the person who walks around to figure out where the thicker bags are, because they always have one roll of the thicker bags, but they have the small. And I'm thinking to myself, with the pricing of food, can't we just get a little bit thicker bag? I do think
Exactly.
about
And the science that goes into selecting providers for and negotiating contracts for those plastic bags, it's right up there with rocket science, Shanda, I promise.
that. Somehow, I'm not sure if that makes me feel better or worse, but I'm going to take better because I'm the positive person. So, what would you suggest when we talk about collaboration? I talk a lot about leaders and how they work collaboratively, especially the most effective leaders who are PIN leaders, who are thinking about, like, again, their experience or education, making them sharp, having a plan, and then, sticking to it as far as they need to when they need to pivot, but then also having this ability to work with others and do it effectively, which is a strength of character. It's a type of strength.
Sure.
Now, can you talk about how you can build a collaborative environment for procurement, especially when you're buying and you might be competing with others?
Absolutely. So, what I'll say about this, and I think you said the word influence earlier. I think that's a really important word because so much now in business, we talk about influence versus authority. One of the interesting things, actually, we're talking a lot about what procurement doesn't do today, but I actually think this helps sort of create the bigger picture. We don't buy. The other thing we don't usually do is select which supplier is going to win the contract. Our job, if you're dedicated procurement, if you're someone and you're also in finance or also in AP or also in operations and you're responsible for multiple things, you might be making the decision that you're going to award X% of the business to this provider. But if you're in dedicated procurement, typically you're identifying, qualifying, and presenting options to a group of decision makers. And then whoever they choose, you are invested in making sure that those suppliers are successful. So we often end up in situations where we're trying to influence rather than having authority. But one of the things that I've learned from being in those scenarios for a long time that I think carries over to leadership style and company culture is the power of a well-asked question.
Yes.
So many times I think leaders that are trying to be strong in a good way, right? These people have the best of intentions. They want to inspire their team. They want people to feel empowered. An easy thing to fall back on is to be talking about what should be done or telling people what to do because you're trying to convince everyone, including yourself, that you know what to do and you know what's going on and you're going to get us all through this. When in fact, the most powerful, collaborative, unifying, innovative thing to do is to ask a really good question that you hopefully don't already know the answer to, and then give your team an opportunity to think and really listen to what they have to say. Because when people feel like they're being heard, when they see their coworkers being heard, I think it inspires everyone to perform at a different level. And truthfully, especially if you're someone in a leadership position, you may have folks on your team that are nervous about coming forward with an idea that's slightly wacky because, let's face it, we're all still in the third grade. We don't want to look stupid, right? And
That's
so
right.
really opening things up, I actually think this is one of the very best things to go back to it, to come out of COVID. No one had any idea what was going on. Nobody had the answer. Nobody had done it before. And I think it created an environment of openness, or an atmosphere of willingness to try things, potentially fail, hopefully succeed, always learn. Some of that, I think, has stayed with us. And if you're trying to be an effective leader and collaboration is a part of that, I think genuinely asking questions that don't have one right answer is an amazing way to get the very best out of everybody. Hopefully get dialogue going in a respectful environment. And then everybody picks up and can move on with what's the best decision you can make under whatever set of circumstances, but also with everybody knowing that this is probably going to happen again. And so I should be thinking crazy thoughts all the time, remembering them, writing down my ideas. And the next time one of these questions is asked, my hand's going to be the first one in the air because I have an idea that I want to share too. It's not necessarily I'll say authoritative again, for lack of a better word. It's not a control approach to leadership, but if you're focused on outcomes and impact, I have seen few approaches that can work better than asking good questions.
Excellent. I'm going to say right there that we talk about critical thinking and critical question skills, and this is an expectation, especially if you're coming out of college. I've had a number of students who ask me, what should I be working on? And if they're going to work with AI, I say asking the questions can get you to the answers, but you need to have that skill. This is practice, Kelly.
It sure is.
I mean, there are individuals that just it's easy to ask the question and know what the answer is on the other side, but to stop, really think about, am I asking a question that I already know the answer? Or two, that there could be a possibility of a couple paths. That takes a couple extra steps to get your team involved. And then I'm going to really stress this to all my listeners, keyword listening, is to not stop someone while they're sharing their thought. And active listening does not mean interrupting. That means allowing the thought to go all the way through, because sometimes people they're thinking and they're talking at the same time. They're thinking through what their solution is and giving that room to allow that to happen.
Absolutely. And it is very difficult. I think we're all conditioned socially to be thinking of our response while we're listening to somebody talk, but you're missing things. So not that you want awkward pauses in your conversations, but you truly want to let someone get to the end of their thoughts and take a breath. And then ask a follow-up, or let someone else respond and listen to what they have to say, versus I'm half listening to what you're telling me because I'm crafting my terribly clever, insightful thoughts that I'm going to say when you're done talking.
Yes, and it can be hard, especially if you're in a rush, or you're in a time. But there's something said about the art of the pause. Maybe that should be another show. The art of the pause.
Absolutely. That's right.
Well, I've only got a couple questions here left for you, and really one major fun question. I find it fun is, what are you reading and what are you watching? Because you wrote these 3 books. You're out there. Your show's very popular. It's all over. People listen to you for procurement advisement and managing the different ebbs and flows. But what are you watching and what are you reading?
So I love this question because I'm a documentary junkie, I will say. So I'm always watching something very unique, but I also love to read. And neither of the things that I'm reading or watching right now have to do with procurement. So these might be of interest to anybody listening in. The book that I'm reading right now is called Unreasonable Hospitality. It's by a man named Will Guidara, and he had this amazing restaurant in New York City. And in the book, he talks about how they created this guest dining experience, but that also had to be operationally sound to become as successful as they were. And hearing him talk about setting this very lofty goal, struggling to reach it, but balancing how he treated his team and how his team then treated their customers, but also how they put the systems in place and manage their costs and everything. It's a fascinating book. Highly recommend it. You don't have to be in the restaurant industry by any means. It helps to like food and restaurants, but I think most people like food and restaurants. Super, super interesting. And as far as what I'm watching, there is an excellent documentary on Curiosity Stream right now about the rebuilding of Notre Dame Cathedral after that horrible, sad fire. I think it's 3 or 4 parts. This is sad. Shanda, don't tell anybody. I'm on like my 8th time watching it. I am fascinated by this documentary and the science that they brought in to learn about the cathedral and what they discovered, and even the intricate hands-on work that was done to clean and restore the stained glass panels. It's just, every single time I watch it, I see something new and I'm reminded of the things that impressed me the last time around. Also, highly recommend that. So neither one that necessarily has anything to do with procurement, but I do love to consume different kinds of content and different kinds of information. And you just never know when something from a different space is going to spark an idea in your work life. So I'm always looking for different creative ideas in different places.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's exactly what I look at too. I think the most creative part, they say the other side of the brain, but you get a chance to relax and reflect.
Yes.
And you do, especially from different industries. When I wrote my book, I went across 20 different industries because there was a pattern for the effective leaders. And it didn't have to be in just one industry. And you can drill down in any industry. But,
Oh, absolutely.
But I do think there's something about that cross-pollination. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing that and sharing it with our listeners. I almost want to call you the Queen of Procurement.
I'm pretty sure that title is taken. I will just take plain old Kelly, who loves her work in procurement and supply chain. But no, it's like the fascinating field that absolutely nobody knows about while everyone is doing it, which is super interesting. And I appreciate you having me, Shanda. It was absolutely my pleasure to be with you.
Excellent. And we also thank our listeners who have been really listening to the show and sharing it. And hopefully, if you have any input for the show, you can write us back at info@mazeassociatesltd.com. And of course, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Jennifer Transition at Edward Jones Financial. She's definitely helping those with their planning for their financial futures. And we appreciate her sponsorship. And until next time.
The PinLeader Podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Maze & Associates LTD, creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building. Find out more at www.mazeassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the PinLeader Podcast and share with others.